This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
Cannabis producers that are creating innovative products with multiple cannabinoids need the best, most comprehensive potency analysis there is. And New Bloom Labs is leading the industry with potency testing of Delta 8, Delta 9, 2 isomers of Delta 10, and a dozen other major and minor cannabinoids that are shaping the industry. New Bloom Labs also offers the fastest turnaround time in the industry. That's right, they deliver most test results in just 1 business day. So if you find yourself frustrated with your testing lab by waiting long hours or even days for your certificate of analysis, or if you're receiving inconsistent reports or reports that are just too hard to understand in general, you need to stop what you're doing and call the team at New Bloom Labs today at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, that's New Bloom Labs. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Andrew Thut. He's the Chief Investment Officer at 4Front Ventures. Andrew Thut, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Great to be here this morning.
Yes, it's great to have you. Really excited to be talking with you about 4Front Ventures. You are the Chief Investment Officer, and just really interested in hearing more about your role and what the company is doing in terms of establishing its footprint in the various states that it's in currently. But before we do that, Andrew, let's talk a little bit about you. So I know that from what I've gathered in research, you started, you've been in the financial markets. I think that you were a managing director at Blackrock. So tell us a little bit about that and kind of what made you transition into cannabis.
I started very early in my career. I was a very junior investment banker here in Boston and quickly transitioned to investment management. So I started my career after banking at a place called MFS, or Mass Financial Services here. I was on their small and mid-cap growth equity team. And from there, I went to Blackrock, where I was there for a little over 11 years, doing small and mid-cap growth equity research. And I was a portfolio manager there as well. So I'd been in that industry for a little, just around 20 years. And in 2013, Josh Rosen, who was one of the founders of 4Front, came to me with this investment idea in cannabis, and they were starting 2008, 2009. They sort of saw the opportunity that was spreading from California on the legalization front, and they founded 4Front originally as a consultant in this space that helped folks not only win licenses, but then helped clients get up and operational. So I started at 4Front as an investor. And when I left Blackrock, I was looking for something new and interesting to do.
When you were approached initially in 2008, like what was your first reaction? Did you have experience with cannabis prior? Were you a consumer, an advocate? Was this new to you? What was your reaction?
So I am always the guy that's had a little bit of weed in my sock drawer before I got into this industry.
All right, I love it. Nice.
Yeah, but was primarily a beer man myself.
Sure.
And I grew up in the Nancy Reagan "just say no," so I was always a little bit sheepish about my cannabis consumption.
Right. That's what we were taught. I remember the DARE days and whatnot. There was a lot of stigma around it, right?
And when I first got the 4Front, well, let me back up for a second. So I made the investment and sort of asked my wife, "Oh, okay, are you cool with this?" And yeah, I'm okay with that. and when I left Blackrock, I was really looking for something else to do. I didn't want to stay in money management. I wanted sort of a different challenge. And I had made the investment in 4Front, and Josh said to me, "Would you be interested in coming into this industry? There's a dearth of talent. We really need, some talented folks to come in here, and the industry's just yearning for it." And I sort of said, "I don't know, man. I'm on the I'm on the finance committee at church. So, and you know,
Like, I don't know what this is going to do to my personal brand here. You
it
know?
was like, you
Yeah.
know, is this going to preclude me from ever getting back into traditional finance? And you know, it was on a personal side, you know, it was really my wife. I sort of said, "Are you cool with this? Are you cool with, you know, being married to the weed guy?" And this was back in 2013, 14. And you know, this is before, you know, things have this issue's come a long way in the last several years.
Right.
And
That was just after Colorado went legal, right? Because Colorado went legal in 2012. So, okay.
that's right. And my wife, you know, said, "Yeah, like go for it." And you know,
That's
you know,
awesome.
it was a great point in our marriage, but it was also, you know, as I I felt free to go do something new and try something new.
Sure.
And the journey in cannabis, and we'll get into it, has been, you know, had a lot of turns in the road, but it's been incredibly rewarding on a lot of levels. It's the hardest I've ever worked in my career, I can
Yeah.
safely say. But you know, it's been a really fun, interesting ride, and I've learned a lot about the business side of things. I've learned a lot about the advocacy side of things. Um, yeah, which we can all get into. But it's been, you know, I'm sort of coming up on year 7 here in the cannabis industry, which makes me surprisingly an old salt.
Right. Well, it seems like decades, right? I mean,
It
it's like
does. It does.
dog years in
Well, look at me.
cannabis.
I'm only 40. I'm only 47. I look like I'm 90. That's all cannabis.
The grays started to come right when you entered, right?
Absolutely.
Well, it's good. It's got to be a great feeling. Like you said, you felt freed when your wife was so supportive initially, and I'm sure that that's not the case for others, new entrants that are entering, especially, family pressures, extended family, the judgment there. I
Mhm.
know that I had that trepidation initially, but I had the same, kind of support with my family right off the bat. They were like, "Go for this, do it." My wife included, and when you enter, to your point, like, it's been 7 years in your perspective, and I can't imagine the just data download and the learning and the education and everything that you kind of were brought on, because you were such a big asset and component to 4Ventures mission, right? Or 4Front Ventures mission. So let's talk about that, like the education aspect of it. Was that overwhelming at first? How did you gradually ease into this?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, cannabis to me was, you know, nothing more than, and I'll tell you something personal in a minute. Cannabis was nothing more, you know, I'd ask a buddy, you know, when he got a bag of weed to cut me in, you know, when I was out. And that was sort of the extent of my relationship with cannabis. And when I joined 4Front, I became very good friends with Chris Crane, who was one of our founding partners. And you may know of Chris. Chris is a wonderful guy, and he has spent his life on campaign on advocacy and the regulatory regimes. Like he's a world renowned expert on, you know, how to legalize cannabis. And Chris is a guy that he was a founder of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and then he was vice chairman, I believe, for Normal right out of college.
Wow.
What affected Chris so much was his father was suffered from a rare lung disease that he eventually passed away from. But when Chris was little, his dad would smoke joints to open up the capillaries in his lungs and would help him breathe.
Mhm.
And that had a huge effect on Chris. And as he got to college, he thought this was crazy that, you know, kids could lose their federal funding and their federal funding for school loans if they were busted with cannabis, but yet everyone could be running around. Everyone could be running around um, campus drunk.
Right.
And so Chris got out of college, and I'm sort of getting down the Chris road here for a second, but Chris Chris got into when Chris got to college, he sort of, you know, saw the hypocrisy in that. And he was one of the founders of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Out of college was, you know, at Normal, and then he went on to become the executive director for SSDP. And as I became good friends with Chris, and early on, Chris and I spent a lot of time on the road together raising money for 4Front, because I was just the money guy. I didn't know much about the industry at all. And Chris was the guy that actually knew what the hell was going on in terms of what states were doing, in terms of their legalization and how it was going to go. There was this big learning curve for investors. And I got to understand, you know, this is a social justice issue. It was an eye opener for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
it had to have been great to have Chris like be the direct point of contact to disseminate that information, right? Because you'll learn the science of it, you'll learn the business aspect of it naturally in the role you're in, but to have him share such a personal experience, being in college and all that, and you understanding the racial injustice component of the plant, that was probably eye-opening as well.
Oh, absolutely. And, the first book he gave me was, The New Jim Crow, which, I sort of consumed the first week. I was on the job, but, Chris, I think Chris is an interesting guy in that he left advocacy to start 4Front because he thought that he could push this issue forward just as effectively, perhaps more effectively, by proving that you could open these cannabis operations in these states and people would realize that it wasn't such a scary thing.
Right.
And so he had a really interesting lens on, pushing this agenda and how by running responsible cannabis businesses, how much that could do to further his cause. And while he's still very deeply rooted in, the advocacy world, that aspect of coming in and showing people that this plant that everyone enjoys either recreationally or as a patient can be regulated and distributed responsibly, and the sky's not going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
And
it seems like just another step in his advocacy journey, right? It's like he's putting actions into play, and he's actually, like you said, removing the stigma by helping these operators get a footing, get settled, and get their business off the ground. And I know that you said that 4Front Ventures started as a consulting firm. So what exactly did y'all consult? Was it like grow assessment consulting? Was it dispensary build out or operations, like all the above?
Yeah. So, very simply put, when 4Front was started, the original investor, didn't want to touch the plant. And, for those who are listening to the podcast that may not understand this distinction, especially going back, 10 years ago, it was one thing to be a consultant to the cannabis industry where, you actually weren't doing something illegal. You're just kind of giving them advice.
Right.
Versus growing cannabis and distributing it to customers through, a very clear federal law violation. And so very early on, our investor was pretty reticent our original investor in 4Front was reticent to touch the plant. And so 4Front started as a consulting company. And basically what we did was we went into Northern California, which at the time was where the best run dispensaries, in the country were run. And we sent the woman named Mel McGraw, who wrote policies and procedures for Einstein Brothers Bagels, Old Navy, traditional retail operations. She sent them into some of the best run California operations, and she documented exactly how you run a cannabis operation professionally, from dealing with the inventory to how you deal with customers to how you train your staff. And that intellectual property that she created is about 2,000 plus pages of standard operating procedures.
Wow.
That was the foundation of our consulting business. And so what 4Front would say, all right, Kevin's applying for a license in Massachusetts. 4Front is going to write his application, and we're going to show the regulators that, Kevin knows what he's doing, because we're going to show all these operating procedures that he's going to follow. And then we would help Kevin. Once we helped him win the license, our operations folks would come in and help get up and running. Mm-hmm. So that was our original business. And when I came into the business in 2014 officially, we sort of said, well, geez, we no longer had that, we transitioned the company from that original investor. And we sort of said, well, guys, if we're really good at winning these licenses on behalf of our clients, and we've opened these things across the country, why aren't we just going after these licenses ourselves?
Right.
And so that is when we sort of transitioned to becoming what is now called a multi-state operator. And so we would either apply in states that were opening up medical programs or adult use programs. And then we made a couple acquisitions. So we started this portfolio of states that we were in that we were the owner operator of.
What state did you initially start in? Was it Northern California or?
We originally are fortunately and unfortunately, the first state that we started in was here in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts is one of the earlier states to go on the East Coast, but it was also one of the more cumbersome from a regulatory standpoint to navigate.
Why is that?
The short answer is the towns in Massachusetts have a lot of control. So, if you look what Kim Rivers is doing down in Florida, like she's done a phenomenal job in that market. I think she has 85 retail locations in Florida.
That's crazy.
And but operating in Florida, things are sort of regulated at the county level, I think. So it's like, okay, well, cannabis is legal, and of course you can put a store there. Why not? In Massachusetts, the towns have a whole lot of sway. And so there was a lot of, I don't want you to be in our town, and what are you going to give me to operate in our town? And
it's similar to California then, right? Like in terms of how, like municipalities can vote whether or not they want cannabis businesses operate, or even they can go to the extent of, we don't want cannabis products transported through our town, right? I mean, does it go to that extent?
It doesn't go to that extent, but these towns, so when I first started at 4Front, I would go into these towns and I say, hi, I'm Andrew, and I want to open a cannabis facility in your town. And they'd say, wow, you're not a hippie. I say, no, I'm Andrew. Like I've got 3 kids. I've got a wife. I live in the next town over.
Yeah, I'm just like you.
Like I'm just like you. Like there's nothing scary here. And so that was the process. But you'd have to go through a process with these towns, sometimes for years.
So are you dealing with like the city council members and like the mayor and like at that like level, or who are you talking to?
You're dealing with the selectmen and the town manager and the mayor in some cases.
Yeah.
And so the game early on, and the game is still in Massachusetts, is you have to have those relationships, and you have to establish trust with those towns that you're going to do things properly and you're going to run a good business, and it's not going to be some scary thing that someone's going to have egg on their face for allowing you into their town.
Right.
And so, but that process, we're on the cusp of opening our 3rd dispensary here in Massachusetts, in Brookline. We've been at that for 3 years.
Wow.
It's a long process where you're doing community outreach, and so and you're meeting with the selectmen. They're getting to know you. They're getting comfortable with you. It's a much different scenario than going to a county in Florida, for instance, and saying, "Hey, we want to open a dispensary," and they say, "Cool, is it zoned?"
Right. Well, isn't that like kind of the underlying like win when it comes to 4Front Ventures business model, is that like you're a multi-state operator, and right now I believe you're in 5 different states, right? California, Washington, Illinois, Michigan, and Massachusetts. So Massachusetts may be the most challenging when it comes to what you've talked about, but maybe other states are a little more easier to enter. Is that right,
that's true. But think about Warren Buffett always talks about liking to have moats around his businesses. So in Massachusetts, one of the things that you have going for you, it's challenging to get your licensing. But once you have that license, it's pretty hard for others to come in, and there are a lot of towns that are just going to ban it outright. So your competition is going to be much more limited, and so you can take a lot more share of that market. And we're seeing that in our Massachusetts business after a long journey, towards getting all our proper licensing. We're seeing the fruits of that labor right now, and that our 2 open dispensaries in Georgetown and Worcester are everything we'd hoped they'd be, and then some.
Right.
And when we've got our 3rd opening up here, so
it's kind of like
a state like this, a limited license state is great.
It's kind of, yeah, like pay your dues, but then you'll kind of reap the rewards kind of after you've gone through that process. Let me ask you this, and you may not know it, so no worries if not. But when I'm thinking back about previous podcasts and drawing the example of the difficulty with the limited license state like Massachusetts compared to California, and I think that they said that there's 690 some municipalities within California. I could be wrong, but of that, 33 of them allow for cannabis, which blew my mind, right? Because California is so big. So do you have a breakdown of like the municipalities that allow and do not allow for cannabis
in California?
No, in Massachusetts?
I do not have that off the top of my head.
That's no problem. I was just curious, because that example in California is just so shocking to me. Because on the outside, if you don't live in California, you think it's a blue state. They're very friendly with cannabis. It's everywhere. But in reality, it's really not right now.
Right. And so, and then you have this, you've hit the nail on the head that you have this zoning problem. So people say, okay, well, cannabis is legal, and I want to get into wherever it is, Santa Monica. And Santa Monica sort of says, whoa, wait. Let's talk about this. Where do we want these things? How many do we want? Who do we want to give these to? And that process of just sorting through those three basic questions, that can take 2 years.
Right.
So California, we're at this interesting crossroads where it legalized. There weren't any regulations. The regulations were pretty iffy. And finally, we're getting to a point where the moratoriums that the municipalities put on these licenses are starting to lift as they've sorted through some of those issues that they've been grappling with.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So just now you're starting to see more retail come on in California. So it was a very disjointed market to start.
And they started so early, right? So that's kind of, I guess, a natural progression in all of us in these states trying to figure this out, right? In terms of regulation and whatnot. So they may have started very hard press, but they're starting to see as other states roll it out differently that maybe they can, like you said, lift some of those initial, restrictions.
So here's something that I think is really, some listening to the podcast, might say, yeah, no duh, like everyone knows that, but others may not. There's this distinction in the cannabis industry and about, a limited license state versus, a more open state, like say a Washington and Oregon. If you're in Washington state and, you have $10,000, and it used to be you couldn't have a criminal history, but that's changed with social equity and some other things. But you could enter that state. And so you had all this capacity coming in. And so you saw the prices decline pretty precipitously in a state like Washington. In a state like Massachusetts, in a state like Illinois, or, you got that license, they were really, really limited. You had very limited competition, pricing stayed up. It was a lot easier to make money in a state like in these limited license states. And that's where, that's why guys, players like, GTI is, their bread and butter is limited license states. And you can see why, like, they're protected, pricing's going to be buoyed. They're poised they're well capitalized and they're poised to take a lot of share. But maybe this is a good time to sort of segue into some of the strategic things that 4Front did.
Yeah.
So we were in these states. So currently we're in California, Washington, Michigan, Illinois, and Massachusetts, and we have a license pending in New Jersey. And about 3 years ago, we sort of said, okay, we're really good at winning these licenses. We're good at retail. We're good at the regulatory side. We're not very good at cultivation and production. And in Massachusetts and Illinois, we had, cultivation and production facilities. And in Illinois, we've got a super license where we can produce up to 210,000 square feet of canopy. There are only 20 of those licenses.
Wow.
So growing at scale, we were like, gosh, we all sort of looked at each other. We're like, we really don't know what we're doing and we're not very good at it. And so we merged with a company about 18 months ago called Cannabis, who Their facilities in Washington are the #1 edibles producer, the #2 flower producer, in one of the most competitive states really in the world. Now, you would say, well, why would you want to merge into a company that's in a really competitive state? And the reason is that Canix had figured out low-cost production, where because they were operating in such a competitive state, they had to figure out how to get all the cost out of cultivation and producing all these finished goods at scale.
Mm-hmm.
So you walk into the facilities in Washington, our flower's great, but you walk into the production facility, it's 40,000 square feet, 200 people, 24 hours a day, where we've got 3 kitchens going, 2 extraction labs going, packaging, boom, boom. It's a factory.
Mm-hmm.
They figured out low-cost production. Why is that important? One, because there's a lot of price elasticity in cannabis, meaning that if you can give people a quality product that's a lot cheaper than the competitor, you're going to take outsized market share.
Mm-hmm.
To offer that cheaper price, you have to figure out how to produce it cheaper. Canix had figured that out, and they have close to 10%, the facilities have close to 10% market share in Washington, and they were making over 30% EBITDA margins doing it. So they figured out how to make this breadth of products, 25 different products that were dominating the Washington market. And we sort of said, okay, this is great. So if you can make it in Washington, you can make it anywhere, right? They figured out how to automate. They figured out how to wring all the cost out of this. If we can bring those products and those production methodologies to Massachusetts, Illinois, California, maybe New Jersey, maybe Michigan, we have the opportunity to take a lot of share because we can offer a very good value proposition to the customer. And we know that our products are good because they've done so well in Washington.
Right.
So that was a big shift in our company that happened about 18 months ago.
What is the differentiator that Canix brings to the table? Like, how have they mastered that efficiency when it comes to operations and everything that you mentioned? It's a factory, right? So is it the technology aspect? Are things automated? Like, what is it?
There's an incredible amount of automation. There's a lot of bulk buying, everything from the medium in which we grow to packaging to everything else. It's a little bit of everything. So Leo Gauntmaker, who is our CEO, who was the architect of that facility in Washington, his family is one of the largest seafood distributors in the country. So they've had to figure out how to take seafood off the dock, package it, white label it for Costco, distribute it across the country. They've had to figure out how to do that all efficiently. And basically, to simplify it all, they'd applied a lot of those best practices to the cannabis industry. Right. And work their tails off. And they had to figure it out because the price because Washington wasn't a limited license state, everyone and their brother could open a cultivation facility. So you had to figure out how to make money selling weed at, call it $600 a pound. Mm-hmm. To just to frame that, wholesale, a pound of weed in Massachusetts wholesales right now for $4,000.
That blows my mind. I had a guest on that was from Massachusetts, and he said that, and that just is crazy to me because the average price for a pound of good flower, from what I've seen, is like anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000. I've heard in Massachusetts it can get up to $6,000. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
$6,000 retail. Yeah.
Wow, that's so crazy.
Yeah. And why? Because Massachusetts, you had to talk to all these towns about right, put a grow facility in. How big is it going to be? And so there's limited capacity and there's limited retail. Mm-hmm. And
but your differentiator, which is a good one, I think nationwide, is that low cost, high quality aspect. And I think another value proposition that 4Front Ventures brings to the table is the consistency aspect, right? Like, consumers want consistency in the branded products that they're purchasing, and as y'all enter, you're in 5 states, and as you have your application pending in New Jersey, consumers in those various states are going to get the same product.
They are, and it's a great point. So let's talk about brands for a minute. I am fully on board that branded product in the cannabis industry is the holy grail. Like, you know, Coca-Cola is sugar water.
Right.
And it's why is Coca-Cola better than RC Cola? It's maybe it tastes a little better, but it's a brand that happened.
Right.
And so let's talk about brands for a minute. In California, people would, we're going back 3-4 years. There was this mantra that all brands come out of Southern California and they're just going to proliferate across the country. And so, okay, you've got, so let's go on this thread for a minute. So you've got a great, vape pen, call it, in California. And, you want to, get into the Massachusetts market. You have to go partner with someone with a license. You have to, make sure that they're producing it the way that you want to produce so it has a consistent effect. You have to, have that person in Massachusetts walk into the store and say, hey, I want that XYZ vape pen because I've heard of it, which never happens. So that was sort of, and then there was the whole, celebrity endorsement of brands.
Right, which we're seeing now. I mean, it's proliferating even more each day.
I'm very skeptical. No one's walking into my Massachusetts facility saying, give me the XYZ celebrities weed. They're not. So in cannabis, there's an 80-20 rule where 80% of the product is consumed by, call it 20% of the consumers. That 20% of the consumers is really price conscious. So you can have a killer sauce pen in Southern California that, is premium and it's full spectrum and has great terpene profile and blah, 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 blah. If you give the market a vape pen that is 30% cheaper, you take all the share. And so that guy that's selling that premium pen, he can't come down to that price point and make any money.
And we're assuming that the quality is the same. The terpene profiles, everything that you mentioned.
The quality doesn't have to be the same. Right now, we're talking about
brands,
cheap THC.
Got you. Okay.
So, which thank you for getting me back on track. So we can do that. So what we say is price is our brand. So most of our products are, our marijuana infused products are made with base distillate, and we use the same distillate. Distillate is sort of pure THC oil. There's no flavor to it. You could put grass clippings, indica, sativa, whatever, into the extraction machine, and this distillate comes out the bottom. So you have a base material for that. And then you have consistency because we have buying for all the other ingredients across all the states. So it's a consistent product, whether you're in Maryland or Massachusetts or Illinois or Washington or, soon to be California.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can give those folks who are buying, that slightly cheaper and take all that market share, they sort of say, yeah, this crystal clear vape pen, it maybe is not as good, but it's pretty darn good. And it's 30% cheaper. And all of a sudden, if you could take all that market share across 5, 6, 7 states, all of a sudden you have national brands. And you did it without, celebrity endorsements and everything else. You did it by giving people a quality product that took a lot of market share because it was priced correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no doubt that the consumer, especially, in this day and age where we're coming out of an economic crisis, the pandemic, people are more price conscious about what they're purchasing. And so I totally see the niche there in terms of your target kind of customer base. To drill down into that customer base a bit more, would you say that these consumers are active, regular consumers of cannabis, or are they new entrants? Like, what are you seeing there in terms of their level of tolerance, I guess, when it comes to THC infused products?
It's the core customers coming in, and spending about $100 a transaction. They're coming in, every other week, call it. And they are the bread and butter. And I'm not. And then on some of the, categories like drinks, a hardcore cannabis consumer is probably not having a seltzer right now. Like I think drinks, last I checked, was less than 1% of the market.
Yeah, they haven't been doing as well from all the hype that they received kind of, a year or two ago. It's true.
And I think when you boil it all down, and when you've got to be careful that you can't always talk in anecdotes, but I think that my wife, who's not a cannabis consumer, if I brought home a seltzer with cannabis in it, she might say, okay, sure, I'll try that. But that's not a big recurring thing for her. And
Right.
so it's sort of it's a niche, and there's a lot of upside if you can continue to bring in soccer moms, and that's great. But the core of the market is that regular consumer who is switching from the illicit market or the gray market to the legal market.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, as the taboo has left, I'm seeing here, I live in a suburb of Boston. It's folks are sort of gravitating towards cannabis. They're saying this is great. I'm not hungover. I'm not drinking a ton. I'm not, putting on all the weight. So I think that you're getting a little bit more adoption from people that haven't been consumers in the past. But your bread is really buttered by that more regular consumer that comes in and they're pretty price conscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are definitely seeing cannabis as a different alternative. I think their eyes were open, being locked down, quarantined during the pandemic. We saw consumption rates of cannabis almost kind of level out and be the same as alcohol consumption. So that is a fact, and so I'm interested to see where that trend goes in the future. I want to also give some light to our Twitter audience and followers out there. There were a couple of questions when I promoted that we would be talking today. And one question that came in was, you were quoted talking with, I forget the man's name, I think Dan something on a podcast, I guess, but you said that
Oh, the guy from Dan from MSOS. Yep.
Dan from MSOS. Sorry,
Yep.
Dan. I didn't know. I missed your
No,
last
yep.
name. But you were quoted saying that 4Front Ventures is in its second half story in 2021, and the person tweeted it just wants to know what that means.
So we have so we've talked about low cost production, and truth, like we are just entering the California market right now. So in California, we've been building we've been saying 185. It sounds like it's going to be more like 170,000 square foot production facility, massive facility
Wow.
in Commerce, California. And we're bringing in the automation. We're basically taking the automation that we've honed in Washington State, and we're putting it on steroids to address the California market. And we are using the same equipment and automation that the Mars Candy Company uses to produce products. And so let me frame this for a second. Our edible, our gummy square is called a Marma, which is I think it's the number one edible or gummy in Washington State. We make 3,500 boxes of those in one shift using 25 people. So 3,500. We're one of the most efficient producers in Washington State. With the automation that we're bringing to California, we can make 30,000 boxes in one shift using 4 people.
4 people.
4 people. Wow. So, you and I have talked about how you need to be the low cost producer. We are the low cost producer in spades. So let's talk about California. California, there's been a lot of stuff. We've talked about the municipalities that have been slow to roll out, dispensaries and some of the quirks that have been in that market over the last several years. But I think if you boiled it all down, and I think the people could debate me on this, but I always try to simplify. If you boiled it all down, one of the biggest problems with the California market right now is that the legal market can't compete with the illicit market or gray market on price.
Right.
And with the automation that we're bringing to California, we think that we can undercut the illicit market by 20 to 30% and still make 30 to 40% EBITDA margins.
That would be a compelling headline. I mean, that is incredible if you guys can pull that off, because as you mentioned, as we're hearing, the illicit market is thriving, particularly in California, because of all the challenges that operators
Mhm.
face.
Yeah, I think people sort of say, all right, well, if it's going to be that much more expensive, I'll just go to my guy, or I'll, So we think that, we internally we're calling it the Death Star. Like we think that we've built this facility which has the capacity to do $500 million in revenue. When fully ramped. We don't have that baked into any of our assumptions right now, but it's a fully automated consumer packaged goods facility where we can offer retailers, not only retailers and distributors, not only access to low cost quality product, but we also have the capacity in that facility to do white label and private label for retailers. So if you're XYZ retailer and you have, 10 stores in California and you're trying to manufacture your own private label XYZ gummy cube, we can do that for you. Instead of a square one, we'll do a circle one. We'll put it in your packaging. We'll do that for you, soup to nuts. And so the short answer to why we say the back half of this year is so important, because that facility comes online. It's coming online as we speak.
Perfect, because that was the next question that we got from Twitter, was when does that CPG facility in Commerce, California open? So
we are, we have our earnings call next Monday when we'll give a more thorough progress report there. But we've had the folks, the company that's installed the equipment from Germany. They've been on the ground in Commerce for a month. That facility is, on the cusp of getting its certificate of occupancy, and we anticipate, being in a position to, have product roll into the market, really in the next 4 or 5 weeks.
man, that's exciting.
So, we're incredibly excited, incredibly focused. It's a really important initiative for our company. And, there's been a lot of, it's funny, like investors, going back 3-4 years ago, a lot of investors went into California and they sort of said, well, this is the best state ever, because it's so big, you don't have to replicate operations across each state, because you can't take it over state lines. And some of the rollout of the adult use in California has kind of soured folks, like, it's overtaxed, it's overregulated,
Right.
it's a little screwed up. So investors have been really wary of California. Whereas we say, you know what, some of those things that you're concerned about that have made it, a dicey rollout are starting to clear themselves up. And we think that we're uniquely qualified to go into California and do a bang up job and take a lot of share. We've have dominant, our facilities have dominant market share in Washington State, close to 10%. And if we did a fraction of that in California, this would be a massive revenue and EBITDA opportunity for our company.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are you envisioning happens if you guys, when you get, I guess, approved for that New Jersey application? Like, what's the plan in New Jersey?
Yeah, so we're not positive we're going to win that application or that license, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. We applied for a vertical license in New Jersey in 2019. And I believe they were opening up for 6 vertical licenses, meaning, you have the opportunity to not only, cultivate and produce, but also have some retail associated with it. And we applied for that license in 2019, and there were a handful of applicants who submitted applications. I think the story goes that they had some corrupted files that they submitted to the state, and the state kicked them out of the process. And so they sued the state and said, all right, we need to be let back in. This wasn't our fault. So the whole state shut down the process while those claims worked through the legal system. And it took about 15 months for them to work through the legal system. And it just got resolved about 2.5 months ago, I believe. And so we finally got a ruling, and we are anticipating the awarding of those licenses in New Jersey, imminently. We thought it was going to be as early as March, and then we heard April, but our our crystal ball watchers, are saying that June is probably pretty good. They're getting there.
Nice.
So if we win that, we already have our retail location picked out, but we would immediately go towards building out our cultivation and production facility.
Gotcha.
And New Jersey is a fantastic state, because the way that New Jersey rolled out, this is a quick history lesson. New Jersey approved medical marijuana, and it was the last thing that John Corzine did as governor before he left office. And then Chris Christie came in. Chris Christie was a federal prosecutor, didn't like marijuana. And so he basically did everything he could to keep his boot on the throat of the industry. And when he left office, Murphy comes in, and he ran on a legalization platform.
Right. Yeah. He was pretty open about it right away.
Yeah. So, what you have in New Jersey right now is you have this dynamic where, under Chris Christie, there were I think there were a handful of license holders and a really limited patient base for the medical program. And so you have this state that, is obviously really dense, really populous, that's ready to go wreck. And there really isn't a huge, there aren't a lot of incumbents in that state. There are a handful of operators who are up and running right now. So it would be an absolute boon for our company. And I don't want to be promotional at all. We still need to hear the results of the application, then we need to win it, which isn't a slam dunk. But if we do, I think it, it's going to add a lot of blue sky to our story as you look into 23 and 2024.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One more question from Twitter. Not sure how much you can say on this topic, but I'm going to throw it out there. Ideal potential M&A partner for 4Front Ventures.
Look, I think as a general rule, when we've completed the CanX merger, we said, all right, we're merging with this company whose facilities have dominant market share in one of the most competitive markets in the country. And they've got 25 brands that are top 10 in every single category. They know how to do flower, know how to do it all. And the thesis was really simple. We're taking that expertise in those brands and we're putting them in these other nascent recreational states. And the first state that we put those products into was Massachusetts, and the grow methodologies and all that stuff. So a little over 15 months into Massachusetts, we were tickled. We couldn't be more pleased with the results, not only from how our cultivation facilities are yielding, but from how our products are being received in the market. And so we feel like that's proof of concept. Okay, great, you're doing it in Washington, but can you do it in other states? And people sort of question that, and we've proven that out. And now we sort of say, well, if we can take a state and we can do our thing to it, internally, see, sprinkle our pixie dust, our operational pixie dust on what we're doing, and the results are excellent, let's find more assets to do that with. So I think from a M&A standpoint, we'd like to have, more bulk in Massachusetts. We'd like to be a wholesaler in Massachusetts. We'd like to have an even bigger presence in Illinois. We think that state is terrific. And, I think that we're very called, we want our acquisitions to be accretive. We want them to be, come with some operational talent where we don't have to, go in and fix something necessarily. But we like opportunity. We like acquisition opportunities where we can go into a state and we can become a wholesaler and start to replicate what our facilities have done in Washington and all those other states. And so there's that balance of getting overstretched from a capital standpoint and what your people can actually execute on. Mm-hmm. But I think that I would be really surprised if 4Front was not, putting some deals on the tape, at least one or two this year.
No, that was a good answer. Thank you for that. So as we wrap up, Andrew, I want to give you the floor and get your thoughts on, are we in the state now where we're approaching the quote unquote golden age of U.S. cannabis? If yes, why? If not, why? I mean, the floor is yours.
You're stealing my line, or maybe I fed it to you, Kevin.
You fed it to me.
But
You did.
I think that having been in this, I have sort of two lenses on this. I've been in the industry for almost 7 years, and I also, spent my career prior being a small cap growth investor. So I have a pretty good sense of the markets, and I have a good sense of this industry. And I think that you have something incredibly unique going on. You've got great regulatory tailwinds. You've got potential for well, let me put that on a shelf for a minute. When you look at the internet, when the internet was a big thing in 99, 2000, everyone kind of understood that this internet was a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of crappy companies that were coming public.
Right.
A lot of them.
Right.
And I would say that, in the first wave of cannabis, people were starting to go public, in 2018, 2019 up in Canada. And there were a lot of crappy operators, frankly. And I'm not meaning to throw shade, just want to let people think they're all losing money and And early on, we tightened our ship, and we were sort of one of them at one point. But we sort of got that focus that we needed to thrive. But my point being, there was a big liquidity crunch in 2019 where it was really tough to come by capital, and a lot of folks basically went bankrupt or went into receivership. And so I would submit to you the leadership and liquidity crunches are good because they make everyone get religion about profitability, profitable growth, deployment of capital. And
it's a gut check moment, right?
It's a gut check moment. You sort of say, well, crap, I can't lose money forever, or I can't bring in capital. I need to run a profitable business. I need to, grow this responsibly. I need to allocate capital responsibly. And I think you look at the leadership now, like GTI, Trulieve. I mean, those in my mind are the bellwethers of cannabis right now. Those are profitable, well-run companies. And then you have, the next call 10, of which we're included in, and we have every aspiration to be in that top echelon. They're generally speaking profitable, well-run companies. Mm-hmm. And so as investors, you're getting this regulatory tailwind. You're getting, probably the first or second inning of this huge $100 billion industry. You have a pretty good set of companies to invest in, because a lot of folks who weren't running good businesses have already been shaken out. And here's what I think is the biggest, and the multiples are cheap. I know I'm sounding like I'm pitching my own book, but
it's true. Everything that you're saying, I'm shaking my head like he's so right. When you say that, when you've made the fact that the competition's kind of weeded out and we have a set of options of companies to invest in that are profitable and performing well, that is true. That's true. It's if you're just plugged into the right audience and network to learn them and hear about this stuff, you can find these companies,
Fundamentals are great in this industry. And you can buy 50 to 100% top line growth for 10 to 15 times next year's EBITDA.
Right.
That's really attractive.
Right.
And so here's the thing. We don't need, and then let's talk about regulatory and why it's so important. Like, as we talked about to kick off the podcast, the federal government and the Democrats are trying to incorporate, social justice into these reforms. And that's important. And I don't want to poo-poo that. But from an investor standpoint, a purely investor standpoint, banking is so key. If we get any crack on banking where the federal government gives a wink and a nod that this is okay to do, I think that the follow-on effects from that are massive.
Let me ask you a question with that, Andrew, because this got brought up with Jeremy Burke, who reports with Insider. We talked about this very thing, and we've heard, at least from the outside perspective, we've seen Schumer kind of change his tune. He was really hard pressed with introducing a bill with safe banking, right? But I think in the last week or two, or last week, we've heard now that he wants to introduce something more comprehensive that isn't solely focused on just banking, because I don't know his reasoning why. My perspective on it is that, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. If he introduces safe banking and cannabis still is federally illegal and scheduled as a Schedule 1 narcotic, will these large private institutions, these banking institutions, even play ball with the wink that you just mentioned of safe banking? Like, are they still going to be hesitant because it's a Federal 1 narcotic?
I think they will. I think that they're dying to do it. They're absolutely dying to do it. And I know I have friends, I'm still very plugged in the Boston investment community. Like, compliance departments they just need
They just need a hint. Yeah.
a crack that, okay, the federal government has said in some way, shape, or form that cannabis is okay. And my ass is no longer on the I'm not sticking my neck out as far.
Right.
What that precipitates is cost of capital coming down for the industry, the potential for us up, and I'm not saying this is included in the banking, but I say it will precipitate. The inevitability of it all is going to precipitate this huge thing. So cost of capital coming down, uplisting to U.S. exchanges.
That's going to be huge.
Like,
yeah.
what's going on now? It's like people are like, yeah, cannabis, cool. It's like, I'm going to go invest in like a Canadian provider that's trading on the NYSE who's losing $100 million a quarter.
And how backwards is that, right? Like, we have I think Boris Jordan said it best. We have US operators, MSOs in the country right now that are profitable, doing well, and they cannot list on American exchanges. They're in Canada. And then you have Canadian LPs that are not performing as well. And they're listed within the NYSE, like you said, the NASDAQ. It's so backwards right now. It's very, very interesting.
In a market that's a fraction of the size of the US, it's absolutely nutty.
Right.
But that's the opportunity.
Yep.
And so when the uplisting and then the institutions come in, and that's a really big deal. So, I think that 4Front was one of the first companies out there that has, what we'd call a traditional mutual fund company invest in cannabis. So last year, Putnam Investments started buying stock in 4Front. And they're one of our biggest shareholders. They were the first sort of guy in the water. And so all of a sudden, think if you had Blackrock, Fidelity, you name it, any big mutual fund complex is able to invest in this second inning of profitable growth at reasonable valuations with awesome fundamentals. like think of what that could mean.
Right.
Like forget about, okay, like let's roll forward a year, okay, we're going to roll these off at 23 and you can put this multiple on. I think the multiple is just simply too low for this industry. Like the fact that you can buy GTI at, I don't know where it is,
20. 14. I think it was at 14 like 2 weeks ago, but it's been hovering in the 20s, like low 20s, I think. But yeah, it's ridiculous.
You could buy us at 12. Like,
yeah.
And I used to work at Blackrock. I worked with a pretty renowned energy investor, Dan Rice, who was a great guy. And he said, once he saw opportunities like this, he's like, Andrew, I think what we have here is a gift from the stock market gods. and I don't want to be promotional or hyperbole, but I sort of follow the logic chain that I just laid out.
Sure.
It makes so much sense to me.
Right.
That this is going to be a great spot to be.
I follow that same logic chain, so you're not alone. And I've said it before on other podcasts that exactly the examples that you just gave, that's kind of is going to be phases of these floodgates opening, right? And it's going to start with banking reform. And to your point, once private institutions enter, it's game over. I mean, it's crazy. And so now's the time as a retail investor to really kind of take advantage of this opportunity that's in front of us, because once federal legalization, in my opinion, happens, that's when big pharma and tobacco step in, and it's M&As at that point. It's acquisitions.
I think you're right. Like, I think the setup is just incredibly. I think the setup is incredible.
Yep. Agreed, Andrew. Agreed. Well, is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with? I mean, I know that I've got a lot out of this. I've learned a lot about 4Front Ventures, the value proposition of the company, the states where it has their foothold. and plans for 2021 and beyond. But I want you to add anything else in that we may have missed.
No, I think you nailed it, and I think that there are right now there are sort of, I would say, a small handful of bigger companies that are getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. They've done a nice job. I would say that this big $100 billion industry is going to have more than 3 or 4 investable companies. And I think that, looking down market for, skating to where the puck's going to be, would be, something that I would do, in investors' shoes. And I think that the path we're going down with, building out our low cost production is going to be a really big theme. You saw it with what Boris did buying that Colorado asset this week.
Los Seños, was it?
Yeah, something like, I don't know how you pronounce it. But the thought is, hey, this is going to be a commoditizing industry. You need to figure out low cost production. And I would submit to you that, we believe that, we're one of the leaders in that. And so whether we, we feel like we have a really clear path to value creation, just organically doing what we're doing. But we think that we, not only our geographies, but our skill sets and our products, would be a great fit inside of, a larger organization as well. So I think that low cost production is a much bigger deal than people think it is right now. And as prices start to commoditize, I think that is going to be the tide going out, where, when that price comes down, you're going to see who can really operate and who really, who really knows how to wring costs out of the business and run a great business. And I would submit that, we feel like we're firmly positioned to, be one of the handful of guys that can wear that crown.
Very well said, sir. I totally agree with you, and I really appreciate your time again. I know I got a lot out of it. The audience did as well. Where can people find y'all's website, your ticker information? I know that you're listed within the Canadian exchanges. So yeah,
So
anywhere
our
they can find
website is 4frontventures.com. So the number 4, frontventures.com. And we're listed on OTC at Frank Nancy FFNTF. So Frank Nancy Tom Frank. And then we are also listed up in Canada on the CSE at FFNT, Frank Nancy Tom.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Andrew. I want to
Yeah,
have you
really
back on.
good.
Yeah, let's bring it back. Let's bring it back on whenever you guys continue to evolve and grow the business. I'd love to have you back.
I really appreciate it, and I had a great time. So thank you, Kevin.
Of course. And
Okay.
thank you all for listening. Bye.